So have Games Workshop finally given Lionel Johnson the datasheet that he deserves? Seems that between 9th and 10th edition he's found the power switch for the Emperor's Shield, and now with it activated, he's got a 3+ Invuln save and -1 to wound. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking about another Warhammer 40k Primarch return to 10th edition. I talked about Lionel Johnson in the Big Space Marine Roundup video earlier on the channel, but has a pretty exciting centerpiece model for the Dark Angels and massively improved compared with previously. I thought it was well worth a video of his own. Let's talk through the miniature, the release and what Games Workshop have said about the model coming out, and then talk through the 10th edition datasheet and how he might wind up playing in game. Lionel Johnson doesn't need much introduction. The lost Primarch of the Dark Angels has finally returned to Warhammer 40k at the climax of the Arcs of Omen campaign, and now the Demon Primarchs of the Galaxy have not one but 2 loyalists to contend with. The Lion's well known for being a superlative and tactically astute warrior, particularly famed for being a slayer of beasts on the old world of Caliban, and his return to the Rock of the Dark Angels has shaken up the chapter, redeemed many of the previously hunted fallen, and seems to be taking up the Wandering Knight type aesthetic, with his mysterious power of forest walking, jumping from place to place. His model was particularly well received out of the Primarch's return to 40k. It's perhaps a slightly rarer example of a Games Workshop plastic head that looks quite nice, looks like an old wizened crusading knight, but someone who's absolutely going to get the job done. He bears his sword Fealty and the Emperor's Shield resplendent on his left hand, and is accompanied by 2 of those mysterious Watchers of the Dark acting as relic bearers for him. At time of recording, Games Workshop still haven't properly released the model. They had that pre-sale box set of the Lion and his Blade Guard retinue. That was a little bit on the expensive side. I'd guess that when he gets a full release it might be a bit closer to Gilliman's prices. He is £42.50, $70 or €55. Definitely the main news about his release was that they released a surprisingly few amount of copies out of a new Primarch who was clearly going to be in high demand, and they even decided to bundle him with some Blade Guard, which do seem to be a bit of a cash grab. Certainly nice enough models in their own right from the newer Primaris range, but not really anything to do with his datasheet, as they don't really seem to have any rules that follow with him now or previously in 9th. As part of the 10th edition rules preview for Lionel Johnson, Games Workshop did actually make a statement on the model release. They've said that they'd hoped that he would have made his individual debut before the new edition came out, though it seems that in the end they don't have enough miniatures to fulfill demand for him, so he's actually going to be coming out slightly after the Leviathan box rather than just before, but they want to make sure that they produced enough miniatures before they put them on their web store to save a repeat of the previous episode where he just sold out instantly. Hopefully we won't have too long to wait. It was a bit of an anticlimax when the model released and very few people were able to get one. Moving on to his rules though, and previously Lionel Johnson had a kind of tame datasheet by 40k standards. When I made a big video fighting him against every single faction leader in Warhammer 40k, he basically came up lacking for his points against all but one of them. Basically he had the melee damage that he needed, but he just didn't really have any special durability rules, and was perhaps one of the easiest models to kill out of any of those faction leaders, despite happening to bear the Emperor's Shield, which you'd think would be a god tier durability relic. Games Workshop have previewed his rules though, alongside the great big Space Marine chapter preview. His points are currently unknown, so we're not able to weigh him up against anything else in the Dark Angels army yet, but we do have a good idea as to how he's going to play in game. Certainly from a raw power point of view, he seems pretty excellent, still a brutal amount of damage, but ridiculously massively tougher. First up, taking a look at his basic functional rules, Lionel Johnson moves 8 inches, similar to his brother Gilliman, who is moving fairly fast across the board, though he does also have the monster keyword as well, meaning that he can't fit through ruined walls or things like that. He'll need to go around terrain pieces. Means that he might need just a little bit more thought with deployment compared with some infantry models. His leadership's a 5+, pretty much the best that we've seen in the game so far, besides certain miniatures like Inquisitor Greyfax, very unlikely to succumb to battle shock, though it's not impossible. He's got an objective control of 4, which should hold its own against small squads of non-troops, and in terms of protecting him from enemy fire, he's also got the lone operative keyword. That's the one that means that if he's within 3 inches of Adeptus Astartes infantry, he can't be shot by enemy guns unless they're within 12-inch range of him. I feel like this guy's going to be a bit of a nightmare to deal with, both between his innate durability plus that rule, means that you could have him basically within 3 inches of an Adeptus Astartes infantry unit that your opponent can't see. And basically he's untargetable at long range. That might be quite a nice ability for deployment. He could be fairly out in the open, but still not able to be damaged. Finally, for his base rules, it looks like you can deep strike him if you'd like to. I guess this represents his forest walking ability, though compared with his previous ability, he doesn't get any boost to his charge once he comes in out of reserves. If he just deep strikes normally, in general you've got around about a 27% chance of just making the charge outright. That goes up to around about a 48% chance if you can spare a command point reroll for it, so around about a coin flip as to whether he gets in if he can budget that CP. In general, I feel like maybe he's a bit of a risky model to start off the board. You are putting a lot of points in a charge that might just fail, though I feel like perhaps compared with some, he could be a particularly good choice for that rapid ingress stratagem. Turn up in the opponent's turn in some place they're not going to be able to deal too much damage to him, and then hopefully make a short charge in yours. Talking of dealing damage and durability though, as mentioned, this guy just seems massively harder to kill now, perhaps what I might have expected him to be in his 9th edition datasheet. His basic stat line certainly isn't too bad for tankiness. He's gone up to toughness 9, the same as Guilliman, so it's basically as hard to wound as a Space Marine Rhino tank now. He's got a 2+ armor save, which is very nice in this low AP edition of 40k, and also 10 wounds as well, one more than previous. The really exciting bits are the bits that he gets from the Emperor's Shield though. First up, he gets a 3+ Invuln save, which is pretty mad in 10th edition 40k. There's not many units that have that at all, and it seems like he's kind of traded that ability with Guilliman in 9th edition, who had his 3+ save from the Armour of Fate there. A 3+ Invuln save can be very swingy. It means that high AP attacks just aren't going to be actually all that efficient on him, which is quite nice seeing that anti-tank weapons are usually going to be the only guns that are particularly good against him anyway. And you've definitely got a good chance to just spike high with the amount of saves that he rolls. I've certainly seen models with a 3+ Invuln save just tank saves for days. The 3+ Invuln save is also particularly massive for a command point reroll as well. It's fairly obvious, but if you command point reroll a failed 3+ save, you've got a better chance of making the save than the 4+ save, so it means that he's an extra good target for those rerolls there. I think the 3+ Invuln would have been quite nice just by itself, but perhaps even more impressive than that is the innate -1 to wound that he has, and he gets that both at range and in melee. The Emperor's Shield really comes in clutch there, and -1 to wound on an already tough model is just ridiculously powerful. It's perhaps best on anything that would have been wounding him on a 5+, maybe things like Strength 8 Overcharged Plasma with damage 2, that'd go from wounding on a 5+ to wounding on a 6, and would be hilariously inefficient, and even things that would have wounded him on a 3+ like Strength 12 Las Cannons, they'll now go to a 4. Basically between the Invuln and the -1 to wound, he's really tough against both small arms and heavy weapons. He's even got a 4+ save against mortal wounds that he can trigger if he needs it, as we'll get onto with his Primarch ability, and the Emperor's Shield also gives him a rule for 6s to save bounce mortal wounds back at the enemy. That one is one that he had in 9th edition, and I still think it's more a bit of fun than something that's usually going to do anything all that meaningful. It is quite fun that in the lore he basically reflects attacks with a big boom. In terms of his average durability, if you fired at him with d6+1 las cannons, you need on average 13 hits with those to bring him down, and a command point reroll for a save could certainly boost that total by quite a lot. He's certainly going to absorb a very strong amount of anti-tank fire, but it gets truly ridiculous if you're going to be wounding him on a 5+ before his -1 to wound roll. On average, it takes 90 overcharged plasma hits or power fist hits to bring him down. At that kind of level, you may as well just not bother. In general, I think there's going to be a lot of weapons out there where you just basically say, yes, it's better to target anything else but him, as they're going to be so inefficient. Moving on to his damage next, and he gets his combi weapon Armor Luminis. This one's got the same bolt profile and plasma profile, though compared with 9th edition combi weapons, he has to choose one or the other. He can't fire both. The plasma one looks like the more valuable one out of the two. 2 shots with Strength 8, AP 3 and Damage 2, and not hazardous. Maybe good for frying a Chaos Space Marine or two. You'd want to swap to the Bolt mode with its 4 shots at Strength 4, AP -1 if he was fighting against, say, Toughness 3 units with bad saves. I think you might want to be just a little bit judicious in the use of this though. If you're going to kill a model or two and make his charge roll a whole lot longer, that might be a bit counterproductive, and he might just be better off holding fire and just giving him a better charge roll, as his melee profile is ridiculously better than this. Talking of which, let's move on to his combat stats, and first up I think it's worth noting that he fights first, which in 10th edition is a really big massive deal. If he's charging it won't make any difference, as he'll fight first anyway, but if the enemy charges him then it's the person who gets charged who gets to select the first unit, so Lionel Johnson will be able to be selected first before the enemy unit that charged them is. The upshot is that he'd be able to hit the enemy before they can hit him, so they basically need to be able to tank a round of damage from Fealty, which does seem to be pretty solid no matter what it's attacking. He's kind of unchargeable by just a light unit on its own. There's quite a lot of things that he'll just comfortably kill in a single round of combat, so you may as well not bother. In terms of his actual close combat damage, Fealty has both a sweep and a strike mode, as with quite a lot of big things. His damage profile is actually very similar to Guilliman's, but basically he gets 1 attack on the strike mode more, or 2 attacks more on the sweep mode, though he does have -2 strength compared with Guilliman himself. On the strike mode, Fealty gets 8 attacks hitting on a 2+, strength 12, AP -4 and damage 4 with the lethal hits keyword, though to be honest he's going to be wounding most things on at least a 3 anyway. Otherwise, for his sweep mode, that one has sustained hits 1, and he gets a mighty 16 attacks with that, at strength 6, AP 3 and damage 2, pretty excellent for clearing out 2 wound infantry. I'd say out of the two, Gilliman maybe has the very slightly stronger melee, which is kind of surprising. Gilliman has devastating wounds on his sweep with the Emperor's Sword, though out of raw durability with a 3+ invul and the -1 to wound, I'd still say the Lion wins overall in terms of raw combat muscle. For very rough expected damage with average rolling, you can expect the Lion to chew through around about 13 Tyranid Termagants, around about 9 Space Marine Intercessors, that's maybe the profile is perhaps most efficient against, 2 or 3 Terminators with their invul saves coming in big there. He deals around about 20 wounds to a Rhino, so will handle most battle tanks in a single round of combat, or just about kills a Space Marine Land Raider with 16 wounds dealt against that 2+ save. Overall, there aren't really any profiles that he's bad against, though I'd say that anything that's got an invul save is going to come out a lot better than the things that don't. Finally, as well as his direct damage, he's also got a Primarch buff. This one's called Primarch of the First Legion, and as with quite a lot of big leader datasheets in 40k, it's basically a decision to pick between 3 different aura buffs in his command phase. For the choice of boost that he gets a 6-inch aura of ignoring mortal wounds on a 4+, handy enough on good sturdy Deathwing Terminators, and on himself as well with all his barriers to damage. Mortal wounds is one of the best ways that you can deal with him, so I suppose if your opponent's got a whole bunch of devastating wounds or similar, that one could be quite good just for protecting the Lion. Otherwise, he's got one for a 6-inch aura of +1 to hit in melee. That one seems nice if he's charging into combat alongside some Deathwing Terminators. Definitely a big combat boost there, and will help them out quite a lot, though it won't usually help his attacks at all as he already hits on a 2. Finally, and certainly the most interesting one, is one called All Secrets Revealed. This one's a stratagem shenanigans one. If your opponent uses a stratagem to target a unit within 12 inches of him, then you immediately gain 1 command point, and also on top of that the enemy unit must take a battle shock test. If they fail it, then the stratagem's effect are nullified, and they still count as having used it. I feel like in some cases this is going to be very, very powerful, in other cases it might be very avoidable. I think maybe I don't like it enormously that it's kind of dependent on the opponent. They can just choose not to spend the stratagem on a unit that's within 12 inches and target something else with something good instead. If the opponent does have some key stratagems that they need to get off though, that could be really disruptive if he's in the midst of the enemy for a turn. It might be the best one to go for if he's got nothing to buff, and also the opponent doesn't really have any significant amount of mortal wounds. Overall, I'd rate all of these as usable, but maybe just a little bit on the niche side. There's nothing that screams out as an auto-include to use every single turn. It kind of depends on what he's leading, or whether or not he needs the defense buff. Otherwise, we don't have the full Dark Angels rules yet, but there are a fair few things that we have seen that can work with him in 10th. The Dark Angels detachment rule is Grim Resolve. This means that if he does get battle shocked, he's objective control 1, not 4. Though I'd say that this isn't exactly the hugest rule for him. Usually it's going to be passing battle shock on that 5+, and even so, objective control 1 might still get outcompeted by the opponent, presuming there's any left. Oath of Moment, I guess, could be a nice enough damage boost if he does happen to be targeting the big target for it. I feel like his damage profile is powerful enough that you might want to target the target of his charge with Oath, particularly if he's trying to take down something really big with a 4+ invul save, maybe one of his treacherous Demon Primarch brothers. For stratagems, again we don't yet know the Dark Angels ones. Will be interesting to see if there's anything that's going to be useful to him. Otherwise though, as a massive great dangerous model, he's going to be useful for a bunch of the core ones, particularly command point rerolls to either reroll a failed charge or a failed save. Both of those could have enormous value depending on what he's targeting or what's targeting him. Rapid Ingress looks kind of interesting for deep strike delivery if you go that way. Arrive him in your opponent's turn somewhere where they can't kill him, and then hopefully have a very short charge the next turn. With that massive melee profile, counter-offensive, heroic intervention, or epic challenge are all seem very usable in the right situation. It does look like Dark Angels will be able to use that Gladius formation as well, which might well be the better option depending on the rest of their detachment rules. Grim Resolve seems a little bit on the lackluster side to me. There's a 2 CP one for him fighting in death if you're absolutely certain that he's going to get wipes in a round of combat. That would be great to guarantee his damage. Or there's also Armour of Contempt as well. If he's about to get lit up by a whole ton of AP-1 fire, then again that could be okay, but it's not going to be relevant against AP-2 or worse. He's already got that very decent invul. Finally, it'll be interesting to see what sort of Dark Angels units wind up being a good bodyguard for him. That Deathwing command squad seems like a fairly reasonable kind of option from what we've seen so far. A regenerating Terminator squad with a boost to the charge and counters more objective control, that seems like a good bodyguard to me. He's almost certainly going to want some sort of Dark Angels infantry unit nearby, just to make him yet more annoying to remove from the table. At least with a -1 to wound and a 3+ invul, if he does wind up on his own, it's not quite as much a disaster as plenty of other characters. Overall, I must admit I am pretty impressed with this datasheet. Lionel Johnson seems very tanky and hard to deal with. It's going to be causing the opponent problems on multiple fronts. You can't really charge him without him fighting first, and besides actual heavy anti-tank weapons that might not be able to directly shoot him at long range, strength 8 and lower weapons are going to be near worthless against him without other special rules like lethal hits or devastating wounds. If it's a major threat as well, he can also flex into his 4+ save against mortal wounds. Might be one of the better ones to go for, just in case the opponent decides to try and use that grenade stratagem on him, or any other sneaky tricks they might have. He can help out nearby squads a little bit with the +1 to hit, though I feel like it's perhaps his own personal prowess that's mainly going to be the draw to him. In game, I think I'd want to be running him up the board towards the central objectives alongside a tanky infantry squad, maybe some Terminators if they wind up being good for the points, and then force the opponent to actually have to deal with that very tanky defensive profile that he has, rather than just trying to kite him and ignore him. If he can get in combat with any enemies that have got strength 8 or less, then he can pretty much damage them with impunity and cause them big problems. I think he could make units with Power Fist and similar really quite sad. Rapid Ingress doesn't seem the worst, but maybe is a little bit over-investment. I think he can quite comfortably just start on the board with that lone operative keyword. Overall, I think his datasheet's far better than the previous, at least in my opinion. I guess we'll have to see how he weighs up against the rest of the Dark Angels army. They do have a lot of other very interesting HQs, and it's going to kind of depend on how many points he is as to whether or not people field him. That's in Games Workshop ever actually releasing the model, of course. Let me know your thoughts on the new reinvigorated Lion though. What do you make of the profile compared with the 9th edition one, and would you be any more tempted to use him in your army? If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, or I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, including new ones just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.